Hey guys, tonight we're diving face first into a greasy, crunchy, and oddly fishy topic: medieval junk food. Picture this dim candlelight flickering through alleyways slick with last week's rain, the cobbled streets sticky with who knows what, and smoke curling out of greasy stalls hawking questionable meat on sticks. The smells are overwhelming: burnt onions, lard that's seen better days, and maybe a hint of boiled cabbage tragedy. You're hungry, but let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time your sleepy snack cravings hit. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the churned mud of a medieval street market, shoes squelching in what might be dirt, but you don't want to investigate too closely. The year somewhere between the 12th and 14th centuries. The place, let's say York, England, or maybe Paris if you're feeling fancy. The atmosphere, equal parts festive and mildly dangerous. Vendors shout across stalls, hawking everything from meat pies to sugar buns, though the sugar part might be exaggerated. Someone shoves a hot, crispy object into your hand before you can object. It smells like garlic and burnt hair. You nod politely. Apparently, yes, it's food. Street food was everywhere in medieval cities. For the average peasant or even the urban worker, kitchens were a luxury. Most homes didn't have proper cooking spaces, and fuel was expensive. So people grabbed snacks and meals from vendors crowding the city centers. Think of it as the medieval version of a food court minus hygiene, health codes, or the occasional rat infestation. Okay, not minus the rats were very much there. The food had to be fast, portable, and above all, filling. No one was counting calories, but if they were, everything was fried in lard, so the numbers would be terrifying. You pass a stall with something that smells sweet flatbread topped with what might be honey or just melted tree sap. Another features something that looks like battered leeks, dipped in hot oil and slapped onto a slab of stale bread. Nothing is labeled. Naturally, and you get the sense asking too many questions might lead to accusations of witchcraft. Mainstream historians agree that the medieval market was a central hub for quick meals. There's even evidence of early food regulation. Some towns required vendors to cook meat in front of customers so they could see it wasn't spoiled. Of course, spoiled was subjective. If the meat didn't walk off on its own, it was probably considered edible. One less discussed tidbit: street food was often tied to the church calendar. On fasting days, of which there were many, vendors pivoted from pork to fish-based snacks. Fried eels, dried herrings, and salted cod made dubious appearances. If you've never tried chewing on dried herring scales with no beer in sight, lucky you. You edge past a barrel of brined onions. The vendor yells something in Middle English that might be an insult or a friendly greeting. You nod either way. He gestures to a plate of cockantrice, a Frankenstein's monster of meats sewn together for shock value. It's not even a feast day, he just enjoys the showmanship. Historians still argue whether most peasants genuinely enjoyed this sort of food or merely tolerated it. Some accounts suggest a fondness for fried doughs and savory pasties, while others paint a picture of nutritional desperation. If you're looking for consistent culinary opinions from the 1300s, you're out of luck. You step over a child selling hot chestnuts, their hands black with soot. He offers you one with a hopeful grin. You bite in, it's hot, crumbly, and surprisingly comforting. Then the aftertaste hits a bit musty. You chew slowly, trying not to think about storage conditions. Behind you, someone screams. It's not violence, just a drunk nobleman biting into a turnip tart he thought was apple. Mislabeling is part of the charm. You smile sleepily and move along. Nearby, an old woman pushes a cart stacked with wafers and folded breads. The medieval cousin of a croissant if croissants were dry, brittle, and stuffed with boiled parsnips. The texture is like chewing a parchment scroll, but you keep going because somehow it's not the worst thing you've eaten tonight. The smell of burning fat intensifies as you pass a cook shop. These were medieval fast food joints where you could sit at a long wooden bench, surrounded by strangers, and order something roasted or stewed. You peek inside. There's a pot boiling with what looks like barley, bits of root vegetable, and possibly something with fur still attached. You decline. In the distance, church bells ring curfews approaching. The vendors shout louder now, desperate to unload what they can before the city watch comes stomping through, enforcing silence and maybe confiscating improper food items. Which, suspiciously, includes most of what you've eaten tonight. You clutch your fried leek bread hybrid and step into a nearby alley to finish it. Rain starts to fall again, lightly at first, then more insistently. You pull your cloak tighter, chew thoughtfully, and decide yes. It's disgusting, but in a way that makes you want another. The medieval world didn't invent junk food, but it definitely set the stage. Greasy, sweet, spicy, and utterly unsupervised. And the best part, no one's judging your third helping. Except maybe the rats. You wipe your hands on your tunic or what's left of it and stroll deeper into the market, where the scent of roasted meat coils through the fog like a greasy ribbon. This is where things get serious. The cry of meat on a stick echoes from a dim corner, and suddenly you're face to face with a grinning vendor waving a bundle of skewers over a coal fire. Each stick holds something vaguely animal-shaped: liver, kidney, maybe lung, or some other interior bit that never sees the light of day unless it's on fire. You take one because that's what you do in these situations. It's warm, surprisingly chewy, and spiced with something sharp and peppery that immediately makes your eyes water. Welcome to the world of medieval street meat. Now, despite what modern snack lovers might think, the concept of meat on a stick isn't new. In medieval Europe, skewered meats, especially offal, were incredibly popular. Not only were these bits cheaper and more available to the lower classes, but they were also easier to cook quickly over open flames. Time, after all, was money, and nobody wanted to spend too long standing in cold rain just for a bite of kidney. The spices. Surprisingly adventurous, even in the 1300s. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were prized flavorings, though incredibly expensive. Sometimes vendors stretched their seasonings with sawdust, crushed nutshells, or even powdered brick. Anything red and dusty could pass as a spice if the customer didn't look too closely. You chew and try not to think about that. Instead, you focus on the taste. It's oddly pleasant smoky, earthy, and so rich it coats your tongue like oil. You're almost impressed. A scholarly debate still simmers about just how accessible spices were for common folk. Some argue that the spice trade boom in the late Middle Ages made pepper more available across class lines, while others claim it was mostly reserved for the wealthy, leaving everyone else with stale herbs and wishful thinking. Still, this vendor seems to have something decent on his skewers. He offers another, this time a strange sausage-like thing that pops slightly when you bite into it. You don't ask what's inside. That feels like a mistake you only make once. There's an old saying, you eat the rich, you feed on the poor. In this case, you're eating the stuff the rich wouldn't touch with a gilded fork. But the joke's on them, this greasy little meat stick is kind of amazing. A fringe delight. Some records point to skewers of ground, mixed meats being formed into rough balls and roasted on the end of a branch of proto-kebab, though no one would dare call it that then. In London, early records of Rissol's meatballs show up in street cook records. Imagine mystery meatballs with medieval seasoning and no napkins in sight. Suddenly, a teenager runs past, gripping a stick with something bright red on it. You follow him out of pure curiosity and find another stall, this one featuring roasted cock's combs. Yes, you heard right, the fleshy bit on top of a rooster's head. Boiled, then grilled, then brushed with something that might be beet juice or vinegar to make it look fancy. Chefs in noble kitchens serve them for shock value, but somehow it made its way to street food. You try one. It's gelatinous, like biting into a soggy rubber band. But hey, protein's protein. What makes this even better is the showmanship. Medieval street food wasn't just about taste, it was performance. The crackle of meat on fire, the shouting of vendors, the dramatic presentation of skewered morsels wrapped in leaves or resting on stale bread for easier transport. People didn't just eat, they watched each other eat, critiqued sauces, gossiped about the goose liver stall down the way. Food was part nourishment, part entertainment. You hear a vendor mock another across the path. That's not mutton, it's Monkey the First yells. The second doesn't deny it. You freeze, half bite in. Is it a joke or just Tuesday historians still debate whether exotic animals were ever consumed regularly outside of royal banquets, but records of monkeys, hedgehogs, and even porcupines showing up in feasts suggest someone was adventurous or desperate. You walk a bit further, the last bite of meat skewer clinging to your molars. A small girl offers you something else, heart on a stick. Not symbolically, like actual heart. Probably chicken. It's been coated in mustard seed and honey before roasting, and though that sounds questionable, it's delicious. Sweet, savory, and intense enough to wake you up for a moment until the sleepiness rushes back in. There's a quiet joy in these absurd little snacks. No refrigeration, no timers, no measurements, just instinct, heat, and enough salt to embalm a small goat. You pause beside a wooden bench where two laborers share bites of a long, oily strip of salted pork. One breaks into a coughing fit. The other pats his back, then takes another bite. The food isn't good in a Michelin star sense, but it's honest, maybe even comforting. If you forget that it came from the underside of a pig that slept in filth and was probably butchered that morning on the same table where it's being sold now. You toss your last skewer into a bucket that might be for waste or cooking stock. You don't ask. Your stomach gurgles. Might be satisfaction. Might be a bacterial uprising. Still, you move on, full in that weird way where your brain's not sure if it's joy or regret. The meat sticks were rough, but they've stuck with you. Literally. The sky has turned a bruised sort of gray now, and a misty drizzle begins to gather on your sleeves as you shuffle past rows of slanted wooden stalls. Your nose, already desensitized by roasted organs and singed feathers, catches a sharp tang fish, fried fish specifically, and it's not the kind of subtle, briny aroma you might imagine from a seaside cafe. No, this is full-on medieval river funk old oil, damp wood, and something that might once have been eel. You step closer, drawn by the sizzle. A vendor in a stained apron is dunking fillets into a battered iron pan. The oil bubbles like a witch's cauldron. He doesn't glance at the heat, he knows it's hot enough because it pops violently when he drops something in. You watch the battered fish crisp up around the edges, golden brown if you squint, and pretend the oil isn't a year old. Deep frying wasn't exclusive to our modern age of churros and funnel cakes. Medieval cooks, especially street vendors, knew the magic of hot oil. Sure, they lacked thermostats, but they had instincts and patience. Fried fish became especially popular on fasting days, when meat was off the table but fish was allowed. Because, for some reason, swimming animals didn't count as flesh. Church logic. You're handed a flat plank of something vaguely fish-shaped. No plate, of course, just a curled piece of bark or old parchment. It's hot, crispy, and salty heavenly if you don't inhale too hard. Beneath the crunch is something flaky and slightly rubbery. Could be perch, could be pike, could be regret. Interestingly, fried fish was one of the earliest forms of takeout. London's Thames River and other water-bound towns had a regular stream pun intended of fish sellers offering hot, cooked snacks for pennies. And if you had a bit more coin, you might get it dipped in vinegar, seasoned with a dusting of crushed herbs, or even wrapped in bread. A lesser-known tidbit. In some areas, fried fish was served with crushed garlic and a primitive aioli. Think mashed garlic stirred into leftover cooking oil and smeared onto a bit of rye crust. Honestly, that's not far off from what you'd find at a modern food truck. Minus the salmonella panic. But here's where it gets weird. Some fish vendors used oil not just for cooking, but for stretching the shelf life of their ingredients. Fish that had started to turn might get battered and deep fried to mask the spoilage. Does it work? Well, your stomach will tell you in about an hour. Historians still argue whether medieval oil was primarily animal fat, or if vegetable-based oils like rapeseed or walnut were used widely. The common belief is that lard was king cheap, widely available, and basically a food group in its own right. Olive oil existed, but unless you were in the Mediterranean, it was priced like liquid gold. You take another bite and the skin crackles under your teeth. A waft of something sulfuric hits your sinuses. You swallow hard. That's the vinegar, the vendor says proudly. Cuts the rot. You nod, tears forming in your eyes not out of emotion, just from the acidic bite. Down the row, another cart offers fried eels, sliced into rings like a calamari. They glisten in the candlelight, swimming in a pan of bubbling fat. A boy tosses one in the air and catches it in his mouth. You're impressed. And mildly horrified, you try one. It's rich, almost buttery, maybe too buttery. The aftertaste lingers in a way that suggests it will still be there in the morning. But you can't deny the satisfaction. You're full, you're warm. You're wondering how much of this counts as a meal versus a dare. Then there's the oil itself. You peek behind the vendor's setup and see a bucket of blackened sludge, presumably the fry oil from earlier batches. It smells like burnt everything. We reuse, the vendor says, adds flavor. That's one word for it. You may have heard of the term dripping. In the Middle Ages, it was literally that meat drippings collected, clarified, and reused to cook other things: pies, fritters, and of course, fried fish. Sustainability wasn't a trend, it was survival. Another nearby stand advertises fish cakes, but don't picture the neat patties from your grocer's freezer. These are mashed fish scraps mixed with leftover grain, onion, and egg, fried until firm. You take a bite. It's oddly comforting, like salty porridge with ambition. As you munch, you overhear two older women gossiping. One claims her cousin died from bad pike oil. The other swears it wasn't the fish, but the sauce, some sort of garlicky paste that turned. He bloated for days, she says casually, as if describing a weather change. You chew slower. By now your fingers are slick with oil. Your tunic smells like a shipwreck, and your stomach is sending up mixed messages. Satisfaction is locked in a fierce battle with suspicion. You finish off the last bite, brushing crumbs into the mud like a seasoned traveler. Then you notice a vendor lighting a new batch of oil. With the torch, it catches instantly, flames licking the side of the cart. He slaps it with a damp cloth and laughs. Bit lively tonight, and you've had your fill of fried fish and mystery oil. You're part satisfied, part greasy goblin now. A creature of the cobblestone snack trail, you wipe your hands on a stray hay bale and move on. Stomach grumbling again because somehow, after all that, you're still a little bit hungry. The rain lets up slightly as you turn a corner into a narrower, darker stretch of the market. There, wedged between a pottery stand and someone selling questionable wool hats, is a table stacked with small, rounded wheels of cheese. You pause because the smell hits you like a velvet-covered brick. It's strong. It's sour. It's let's not sugarcoat it feral. The woman behind the stall smiles with 3 remaining teeth and hands you a chunk of something pale yellow and slightly spongy. Made fresh, she says. 2 weeks ago. You nod, trying not to inhale. You pop the piece into your mouth. And for a moment, it's fine. Then comes the sharpness. Like someone dissolved vinegar into a sock and aged it in a dark cave filled with wet goats. It's incredible. And terrible. And somehow, you want more. Cheese in the Middle Ages was a staple. And yes, it could also qualify as junk food. Especially the softer, stinkier varieties sold cheaply on street corners. The upper classes had their delicate bries and imported Italian varieties. But the average market goer, they were eating whatever didn't kill them. And preferably, something that had gone through a fermentation process so intense it probably became semi-sentient. Soft cheeses, like curds or what we'd now call fresh cheese, were everywhere. Eaten on rye bread, mashed into pies, or just gnawed straight from a hunk. The trick was keeping them from going full rogue in the warm months. Salt helped. So did wrapping them in leaves. But most often, people just accepted that their cheese had character, a lot of character. Mainstream history confirms that monasteries played a huge role in the spread and refinement of medieval cheese. Monks, with their silence and patience, became the cheese influencers of their time. Some even say that they developed early aging techniques still in use today. But out here in the open market, you're not getting monk cheese. You're getting whatever survived the donkey cart ride from the countryside. You pick up another piece, This one riddled with bluish veins. The vendor beams. Extra ripe, she says. You chew slowly. It's creamy. It tingles, and your tongue goes numb for a moment. Possibly from flavor, possibly from bacteria. Either way, you keep eating. One fascinating fringe detail in some regions: cheeses were spiked with herbs not just for flavor, but to mask signs of rot. Rosemary and thyme weren't just for seasoning, they were strategic camouflage. Some cheeses even had ashes rubbed into their rinds. Whether for preservation or just visual intimidation is still up for debate. You glance across the table and spot something shaped like a wheel but shiny. Waxed maybe. You tap it, and it echoes like a hollow drum. That one's from the coast, the vendor says, aged in fish barrels. You take her word for it and step back. There's an open crock nearby filled with what she calls cheese spread. It's beige. It has bubbles. You make eye contact. She nods. You'll regret not trying it. You sigh and dip a bit of crusty bread into the mixture. The taste is sour, grainy, and incredibly salty. But it grows on you. You're not sure if that's a good thing. You overhear someone muttering about rind fights, a local game among children, where they'd throw hardened cheese crusts at one another like medieval dodgeballs. One lad brags that his brother lost a tooth to a particularly sharp cheddar. You nod in respect. Historians still argue whether peasant cheeses were genuinely enjoyed or simply endured. Some medieval cookbooks list cheese in pie fillings and tarts, which implies taste mattered. Others suggest it was all about calories and texture if it was edible and didn't crawl off the table. It passed the test. As you gnaw on another sample, this one delightfully nutty. With the texture of chalk, you spot someone dipping cheese into honey. Not a trend, but it looks bold. Sweet and sour, aged and golden. You try it. It works better than you expect. The honey cuts the pungency, softens the sting. It's dessert and punishment rolled into one. A wandering friar stops to chat with the vendor. He picks up a wheel, sniffs it thoughtfully, and offers a blessing. That'll hold through Lent, he says. You assume that's a compliment. Some of the cheeses are rolled in crushed pepper, some in hay, and one looks like it was wrapped in a page from a discarded sermon. You ask about it. Printing waste? The vendor shrugs. Keeps the flies off. You can't help but notice that despite the varied textures, the colors mostly run in the beige to tan spectrum, with occasional greens and purples that you desperately hope are intentional. But no one seems to be dying from this, at least not immediately. You finish your last wedge and realize your breath could now melt iron, but you're smiling, because somehow, in the swampy, funky mess of it all, this cheese stall has delivered one of the most memorable and oddly delicious snack experiences so far. You wave goodbye to the vendor, who gives you a final gift, a small cloth-wrapped nub of traveler's cheese. You tuck it away, unsure whether it's a token of kindness or a test of intestinal endurance. Either way, it's coming with you. As you walk on, the drizzle starts again, and you can't help but wonder what medieval stomachs were made of. Cast iron, probably. Or something darker. Because between the meat sticks, the fried fish, and this battle cheese buffet, your modern insides are already plotting their revenge. Still, you keep walking, because somewhere up ahead, someone's frying honey bread, and that, dear listener, smells like redemption. You follow your nose like a sleep-deprived bloodhound toward the promise of sweetness. It cuts through the oily smoke and cheese funk like a golden ray of hope, something baking, something sticky, something that might not be made from tripe. At last, you round a corner and find a squat woman ladling a shimmering syrup onto a tray of misshapen wafers. The smell is heavenly honey, clove, and warm bread. You may have reached the medieval dessert district. She hands you one without a word. It's thin, brittle, and already sticking to your fingers. You take a bite, immediate crunch, then sweetness, then a faint hint of onion. That's the bread talking because this isn't a cookie in the modern sense. This is medieval junk food recycled, repurposed, and loaded with whatever was in the pantry. Stale bread was never wasted in the Middle Ages. When a loaf went too hard to eat, it didn't get tossed, it got reinvented. People ground it down into crumbs, soaked it in spiced wine or broth, then reshaped and baked it into new concoctions. Sometimes savory, sometimes sweet, sometimes a confusing mix of both. If you've ever eaten a fruitcake that made you question your life choices, you already understand the vibe. Mainstream historians agree that honey was the dominant sweetener before refined sugar really took hold in Europe. It was easier to obtain and had a longer shelf life. Vendors would drizzle it over everything: cheese, nuts, dried fruit, and, of course, stale bread, which became the base for many medieval treats. Think of it as the proto-granola bar, except with fewer oats and more anxiety. You chew thoughtfully on your honey crust and look around. Nearby, a boy sells chunks of bread that have been dipped in wine, dried near a fire, then coated in powdered ginger. They call it gingerbread, not the fluffy cake we know, but a dense, chewy lump somewhere between candy and spackle. You try one. It tastes like a poem written by a molar. There's another vendor with something even stranger: candied pepper wafers. Thin sheets made of flour and white pepper, brushed with honey and crisped over a skillet. Sweet, spicy, and perfect for confusing your taste buds. You eat too, just to be sure. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some medieval sweets were shaped into animals, knights, or religious figures, both to entertain and to impress. Gingerbread men. Older than you think. One of the earliest recorded uses of gingerbread in England was during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, who reportedly had little edible effigies made of her courtiers. But on the street, these shapes were more often crude pigs, hearts, or angels, and more likely to break a tooth than inspire poetry. You pass a girl with sugar on her face, happily gnawing on what looks like a fried dough twist. You want one? You find the source a thick man with arms like pork legs, expertly flipping knots of dough in a sizzling cauldron. Each twist emerges golden and crisp, then gets a coating of sticky syrup and, if you're lucky, a dusting of ground almonds. You hand him a coin and get one hot off the paddle. It's warm, chewy, and dangerously good. This is fritter territory now, medieval Europe's closest thing to donuts. Recipes from the 14th century describe crispes and fruitowers fried in lard, sometimes flavored with rosewater or saffron. The batter basic flour and eggs, sometimes enriched with wine or ale, depending on what the cook had on hand or how adventurous they were feeling. Historians still argue whether these fritters were a daily indulgence or more of a festival treat. Some say poor folk couldn't afford the oil or the wheat flour, making these snacks rare and precious. Others argue the abundance of cheap cooking fats and leftover dough scraps made frying a common habit. even if it was done with the same level of caution you'd use when lighting fireworks indoors. Back at the stall, you watch the fritter maker fish out a cluster of raisins that got lost in the oil. He shrugs, pops one in his mouth, and grins. Tastes like Sunday, he says. You're not sure if that's good or ominous, but you nod in agreement. You stumble next into a debate between two elderly women. One swears that honey wafers were better before the last drought. The other insists the secret is in how the dough fears the flame. You slink away before you're roped into judging. Some kids nearby are licking hard. Glassy lumps on sticks, medieval lollipops made from boiled honey and herbs, cooled into blobs and stabbed with reeds. You try one. It's surprisingly sharp, like an herbal cough drop with trust issues. Still, you keep licking. The ingenuity of it all hits you. No refrigeration. No mixers. No refined sugar. Yet people still found ways to satisfy a sweet tooth. They worked with what they had: honey, stale bread, dried fruits, leftover ale, and created snacks that filled bellies and lifted moods, even if those snacks occasionally broke a molar. You pass another stall with tiny tartlets pastry shells filled with mashed figs, nuts, and breadcrumbs, a small edible miracle. You grab one. It's sticky, chewy, and clings to the roof of your mouth. But you smile anyway. And here's something truly wild: some vendors reportedly added rose petals to their sweets. Crushed or boiled, they gave a perfumed note to candies and tarts. You taste it now in a delicate square of fig honey paste. It's floral, cloying, and just slightly weird, but in a way that makes you feel fancy, even with mud on your boots. You sit for a moment near a cart's wheel, chewing slowly, syrup sticking to your chin. Children laugh nearby, dogs bark, and a bell tolls somewhere deeper in town. It's chaotic, sweet, and sticky, all in the best way. You close your eyes for just a second and let the honey-soaked warmth wrap around your senses. For all its smells and sounds and peculiar flavors, the medieval dessert scene offers something unexpectedly cozy. And in a world without chocolate chip cookies or convenience stores, that's saying something. You rise slowly, knees creaking like an old door hinge, and shuffle away from the honey-slicked carts and syrupy laughter. The sweetness fades as you drift toward the smell of something heartier, bready, meaty, flaky, and a little bit suspicious. It's time for what might be the most daring bite yet: the medieval pasty. You spot a vendor pulling small, golden bundles from a fire-blackened oven. Their shapes are irregular half-moons with crimped edges, some burnt, some pale. One falls apart in his hands, revealing a steaming mess of grayish filling. He licks his fingers. Beef. He lies. You approach cautiously, and he hands you a warm pasty wrapped in a cabbage leaf. It feels heavier than it looks, like it might be hiding something. You bite into it, and the crust crumbles, pleasantly rich and buttery. Surprisingly refined. The filling well. Chewy. Not in a good way. The texture is meaty, but the flavor is somewhere between boiled sock and very old turnip. You chew with commitment. Pasty culture in the medieval world was a survival game. Pastries were food delivery systems more than culinary masterpieces. They were designed to be portable, filling, and protect the good bits inside from the grime of travel or dirty hands. In truth, many crusts weren't even eaten. They were just medieval Tupperware. Mainstream historians agree that the crusts of these pies and pasties, called coffins in old recipes, were often made thick and dry on purpose, to serve as edible containers. This was especially true for field workers and travelers. But if you were lucky enough to be eating in a tavern or feast hall, you might get a crust tender enough to chew without cracking a tooth. The contents: whatever was around: minced pork, chicken, leeks, fish, offal, leftovers, pigeons, or as this current pasty tastes suspiciously like, a mixture of liver and regret. You take another bite? Still chewy, still ambiguous. Could be beef. Could be squirrel. Honestly, you don't want to know. One charming little detail lost in modern times: medieval cooks often flavored savory pastries with a blend of spices you'd now find in desserts: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, even raisins or dates. These sweet salty hybrids were common, not because people had peculiar taste, well, okay, maybe they did, but because imported spices were seen as symbols of wealth and class, even if your pasty filling was 80% questionable pigeon. Historians still argue whether these pastries were eaten primarily by the lower classes or enjoyed across the spectrum. Some surviving household accounts from wealthier homes include lists of elaborate meat pies, decorated and glazed, but on the street, the vibe was more grab-and-go mystery meat pocket. You approach another cart where the vendor proudly proclaims eel tart. You blink. He gestures to a pie that glistens ominously. You shake your head. He shrugs and offers you a chicken and prune pasty instead. You accept. It's interesting. The prunes are sweet and sticky. The chicken a little stringy. Together they form a strange harmony. It's not bad. Just medieval. A woman nearby slices open a Lent tart filled with peas and onions and hands you a bit. It's earthy, mushy, and spiced with what might be dill or just very ambitious moss. Still, it's warm, and you're grateful. Some records describe umber pies made with pork blood, breadcrumbs, and herbs as sort of ancestor to black pudding in a crust. You pass a stall selling something dark and shiny, but decide to pretend you didn't see it. Not tonight. Then there are the fast day pies made without meat, but loaded with fish and legumes. You spot one labeled trout and cheese, and your stomach gives a cautious lurch. You nod politely and walk faster. Further down the street, a small boy is selling handheld meat pies out of a wicker basket. They're still steaming. You buy one. It's flaky on the outside, packed with something soft inside. You take a bite. Lamb. Maybe there's a hit of mint and clove. Your taste buds are so confused, they just wave a white flag. And here's the best part. Some pies weren't even meant to be eaten right away. Standing pies were dense, sealed parcels baked solid and stored for weeks or months, then rehydrated with broth when needed. You pass a woman hammering open such a beast with what looks like a small axe. She offers you a bite. You decline. You watch as a merchant splits a three-corner pasty between his children, doling out pieces like treasure. They laugh, pick at the crusts, then fling them into the mud once the filling's gone. No napkins, no manners, just joy. Behind you, a baker adjusts a pie display shaped like a castle. Decorative pies were real used in feast halls to impress guests. Sometimes they even hid surprises inside, like live birds. Yes, that nursery rhyme wasn't lying. 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie was an actual gimmick. The crust was removed dramatically, and birds flew out. Terrifying, honestly. You return your attention to your current snack, your third pasty of the hour, and find it has cooled. The fat congealing slightly. Still, it's comforting, soft, flaky, and dense. You finish it with a quiet nod. By now, your fingers are buttery, your sleeves smell like onion gravy, and you feel about 70% pie by volume. Not a bad way to live. You pass a group of young people arguing about which vendor's crust is better. Yours is all sweet one shouts. Yours tastes like socks, another retorts. Pie fights are serious here. You smile because you get it. These pastry pockets, however weird, chewy, or mysterious, are the medieval equivalent of fast food comfort. Everyone's got a favorite. Everyone thinks their mother's filling recipe was best. And somehow, against all odds, these crusted wonders hold together a world of chaos, salt, and surprise. You pat your belly, lick a bit of filling off your finger, and head toward a stand offering spiced wine. You'll need a drink to wash all this down and maybe forget that eel tart. The scent hits you before you reach the stall. Rich, sweet, and just a little spicy, with a sharp note of something slightly off. You spot the source, a booth tucked between two taverns, lit with flickering lanterns, its shelves lined with jugs, flasks, and mugs of varying degrees of grime. This is where the real medieval hydration happens. Welcome to the world of spiced drinks, mulled wine, dodgy ale, and the kind of questionable brews that might either cure you or flatten you. The vendor sees your interest and sloshes a ladle into a steaming copper pot. Hypocrat, he says proudly, pouring the wine into a wooden cup. You nod like you've heard the word before. You haven't. It smells like clove, cinnamon, and dreams of better hygiene. You sip. It's warm. It's sweet. It tastes like a festive punch made by someone who once read a recipe in Latin and decided to wing it. But it's oddly good. The heat spreads through your chest like a cozy blanket, then punches you with a back-end funk that screams. I was stored in a barrel with turnips. Mulled wine, or yipocras, was a common medieval drink, especially in colder months. Wine was cheap, often sour, and had to be heavily spiced and sweetened to be palatable. Cinnamon, ginger, and pepper were favorites, though cloves and nutmeg made cameos if you were feeling extravagant or reckless. These spices also masked spoilage, because let's be honest, medieval wine preservation was less fine aging and more, just boil it again. The vendor offers you another cup, this one with extra root. You decline. Your teeth are still humming from the first. Historians agree that ale, not wine, was the daily drink of the masses. Water wasn't always safe, and ale was mildly alcoholic. Enough to kill bacteria, but not enough to get you knuckle-wobbling drunk. Unless you drank 6 pints, which people often did. Even children had watered-down versions. You spot a different cart selling small ale, brewed quickly, low in alcohol, and often flavored with herbs or wild hops. The mug you're handed is lukewarm and cloudy, with a foamy head that looks like wet bread. You sip. It tastes earthy, slightly sour, and okay. Sort of like licking the inside of a wooden cup that's seen too many dawns. But it's better than dying of typhoid. So you take another. A fringe practice pops into your memory, some medieval taverns, allegedly tossed in a dash of soot or ash into brewing vats to purify the drink. Whether this worked or was just culinary theater, historians still debate. One thing certain, cleanliness was relative, and your ale came with surprises. A group of young men down a round of something called braggot a blend of ale and honey mead. They cheer. Then one promptly trips over a stray chicken. You watch with a distant sense of camaraderie, because after 3 mystery pasties and a goblet of clove wine, you're not far from clucking yourself. A nun walks past you holding a small jug of something steaming. Monastic brew. Maybe monks were legendary for their brewing skills, especially in Northern Europe. Their drinks were thicker, richer, sometimes served with bread or cheese. Basically, liquid meals. You consider asking where she got it, but she disappears into the crowd, leaving behind a faint trail of herbs and judgment. At another stall, someone offers you a concoction served in a cracked ceramic cup spiced cider. Allegedly, it smells like apples, but faintly fermented. You take a cautious sip. It's tart, fizzy, and surprisingly pleasant until a bit of sediment hits your tongue. You swallow it like a champ. You're in too deep now. There's talk around the fire of alewives, women who brewed and sold ale from their homes, marked by a broomstick hung outside the door. Some say they were early entrepreneurs. Others whispered about witches. You think about this as you drink your third mystery brew. Your thoughts are fuzzy, but in a cozy way, like a blanket soaked in mead. Suddenly, the vendor claps his hands and announces hot payment, a wine spiced with honey, herbs, and possibly magic. You get in line. The warmth in the air, the laughter around the fire, and the smell of cinnamon make this feel oddly festive. Your drink arrives piping hot. You sip. It's smoother than the rest. Rich. Silky. You immediately want 6 more. Nearby, someone stumbles and drops a jug, which cracks open and releases a smell so offensive even the rats reconsider. Ale gone wrong, someone murmurs. You take a generous gulp of your piment to chase the memory away. Historians still argue about the alcohol content of these drinks. Some believe they were weaker than modern standards. Others claim some could be as potent as wine or stronger. Either way, the point was hydration, calories, and a bit of light-hearted disorientation. There's one final stop, an apothecary-style booth offering medicinal wine, infused with herbs like wormwood and mugwort. Good for dreams, the vendor promises, with a wink that might also mean hallucinations. You try a sip. It's bitter. So bitter it feels personal. You nod politely and walk away. Now your head is warm, your limbs loose, and your appetite starting to come back. You're swaying gently as you walk, not from the drink. You tell yourself, but from joy. Probably. You can't feel your face, but your heart is full. You lean against a low wall and stare at the flickering torches. People pass, some laughing, some arguing, some passed out. The streets are sticky with spilled wine, broken mugs, and maybe 1 or 2 dreams. You exhale. So this is medieval nightlife. Booze, spice, laughter, and the ever-looming gamble of what might have been floating in your cup. And yet, you'd do it all again. Just maybe not tonight. You wipe the last drops of spiced wine from your lips, well, more from your chin and sleeves, and shuffle forward, guided by a new smell, savory, earthy, and faintly crustacean. You turn down a crooked lane where the market's noise gives way to a low hum of chatter and the telltale crunch of pastry being devoured in undignified mouthfuls. You arrive at a pie stall, but this isn't your standard pigeon and leek affair. This is exotic. You lean in and squint at the hand-painted sign, crab, shrimp, and other creatures of questionable leg count. You blink. The vendor sees your hesitation and waves a greasy mittened hand. It's a special mix, he says. You like pie? Yeah, you nod because that seems safer than asking what's actually in it. The pie he gives you is warm, flaky, and smells promising. You take a bite. At first, it's good, really good. Then you hit something with a crunch. Not pastry. Something jointed. Possibly exoskeletal. Welcome to the realm of medieval seafood pies, popular in coastal towns and port cities. Where fishmongers made good use of shellfish and assorted sea beasts, mainstream history confirms that these weren't just humble fisherfolk food, they appeared on aristocratic banquet tables, often baked into elaborate shapes. Some pies looked like castles. Some roared when cut thanks to hidden mechanisms or, occasionally, unfortunate live ingredients. Yours, thankfully, is quiet. The filling is a blend of whitefish, what tastes like shrimp, and possibly a land-dwelling crustacean no one wants to identify. Still, it's seasoned beautifully. A mix of coriander, nutmeg, and lemon balm gives it an unexpected brightness. It's confusing, it's crunchy, but it's not bad. Here's a quirky detail in some medieval kitchens. Pies were designed to trick diners. A crab pie might not contain crab at all, but rather spiced pork or poultry shaped to mimic shellfish. Some say it was theater. Others claim it was cost-saving deception. Historians still argue whether these sleights of hand were for fun or fraud. You take another bite and encounter something mushy, like mashed peas with a hint of anchovy. It somehow ties everything together. Your teeth crunch again, and you try not to picture legs. A young woman next to you laughs and says, "First time with spider crab pie?" You nod, chewing bravely. "Don't worry," she says. "They boil the legs first now." Mostly, further along the stall. The vendor's assistant opens the lid to another pie. Steam pours out, and a pungent, fishy tang wafts over. This one's eel and oyster, fresh from the river crows, as if that guarantees anything but gastrointestinal risk. And yet, you're intrigued. You try a small slice. The eel is buttery, the oyster briny and soft. Together, they melt into the pastry like fish-flavored custard. The texture is unsettling, the taste not terrible. It's worth noting that seafood wasn't universally loved. Inland dwellers often distrusted it. But along coastlines and major rivers, it was plentiful, cheap, and considered a worthy filler for pies and tarts. Eel, in particular, was a medieval staple, slippery, oily, and easy to catch in traps. They were baked, stewed, fried, and sometimes candied. Yes, candied. You shudder, a fringe favorite lamprey pie. These jawless, prehistoric-looking fish were a royal delicacy. Baked whole into pies and served with rich sauces, often wine or vinegar-based, to cut the extreme oiliness. You pray no one's offering lamprey tonight. The woman next to you finishes her pie and licks her fingers. "Better than mutton," she says, "and less teeth." You laugh, and she hands you a folded fritter from her pocket. Try this. It's crab bits fried in barley batter. You take a cautious bite. It's crisp, fluffy, and filled with something flaky that might be fish or, honestly, at this point, it could be rock barnacle. But it's tasty. And you finish it in 2 bites. You pass a pie that smells like cinnamon and seaweed. Sea pie. The vendor calls. Salted cod, raisins, and boiled onion. That one gets a pass. Your stomach is already issuing warnings like an old town crier. You pause to sit on a low wall, watching steam rise from a cracked crab shell someone discarded. The shadows flicker in the firelight, and you notice how many people are happily crunching into pies with mystery ingredients. In a time with limited food options and no refrigeration, you begin to appreciate the ingenuity. The pies are more than meals, they're time capsules of what was available, what was affordable, and what could be hidden in dough. You remember reading once that the crusts of these pies called huff paste when used in showpiece feasts were made inedible on purpose, baked into hard casings to hold fillings in place for transport or display. Sometimes they were even reused. You glance at your last bite. This crust is very edible and very fresh. Probably. You hear two vendors arguing over how many legs a proper sea spider has. One insists it's 6, the other 8. They settle on however many are still attached when it goes in the pie. You don't correct them. You wash down the meal with a sip of ale still warm in your mug. It pairs weirdly well with fish pie. Or maybe your taste buds have just given up. Looking around, you see that even in this world of strange combinations, odd textures, and seafood you wouldn't recognize in daylight, there's joy, people sharing bites, laughing, debating crusts and fillings like food critics in tunics. And as strange as it all is, there's a kind of comfort in it, a kind of community, a mutual agreement that, yes, we're all eating something with too many legs, but at least we're doing it together. You dust off your fingers and rise. The next craving is already forming. Something sour. Something pickled. Because what's a crustacean feast without a vinegar chaser? You follow the scent trail like a sleepwalking bloodhound, tugged now by something sharp, vinegary, and nose-crinkling. As you round another crooked lane, you see barrels, big, briny barrels lined up beneath a canvas tarp. They're filled with shades as green, yellow, and a brownish hue that can only be described as fermented optimism. This is pickle territory. Not the dainty cucumber spears you might expect, but the medieval motherlode onions, turnips, garlic bulbs, fish heads, beets, unidentifiable roots, and something that may have once been an apple. A vendor with elbows like worn stone gestures toward a tray. Sample, he croaks, holding up a chunk of something aggressively red. You say yes because you're committed now. The piece is cold, wet, and crunches like a haunted snowball. The flavor sour, fiercely so, astringent, spicy, and oddly floral. It leaves your cheeks puckered and your eyes a little misty. Pickled food in the Middle Ages wasn't just a snack, it was a necessity. Without modern refrigeration, preservation meant survival, and vinegar was the closest thing to a miracle. Almost anything that could be pickled was vegetables, fruits, fish, even eggs. Entire treatises were written on the art of brining and preserving, though most vendors followed the add more salt and guess method. Historians widely agree that pickling was common across all social classes. Rich households used wine vinegar and fancier spices. The poor made do with beer vinegar, cheap salt, and hope. But the result was the same jars and barrels of food that could outlive most family pets. You take another bite, this time of something green and suspiciously shiny. The texture is like chewing damp leather that's been taught table manners. The vendor beams, pickled rampion, he says. Good for the humors. You nod and hope one of your humors wasn't just murdered. One barrel nearby is full of what look like tiny apples. You bite one. It's a pickled crab apple, sharp enough to clean your teeth from the inside. Tastes like fruit crossed with firewood. Another bite yields a carrot stick soaked in spiced brine with cloves and mustard seed. Better, much better. Almost snackable. A fringe favorite, pickled walnuts. Dark, wrinkled, and soaked until they're soft and meaty. Records show they were sliced into tarts, mixed into sauces, or eaten as bitter little challenges during long winter months. You try one. It tastes like regret wrapped in tannins. But hey, it's an experience. Then there's the garlic. Whole heads, brined and aged. You try a clove and immediately feel your ancestors cringe. It's soft, pungent, and somehow manages to taste like it could power a small siege engine. The breath you'll have after this could start fires. A curious child hands you a skewer of mixed pickles onion, beet, and what may be radish? She grins and runs away. You take a bite. Each piece competes for dominance. Your tongue loses. Historians still argue whether pickling in the Middle Ages leaned more savory or sweet. Some regions, especially those with access to spices and sugar, favored sweet pickles fruits preserved in vinegar and honey. Others leaned salty, sour, and bold enough to double as paint thinner. Tonight, you're definitely in the sour camp. There's also a side game of social signaling and pickle choice. Fancier households might serve pickled cherries or spiced pears at feasts to show off. Down here on the street, it's root veg roulette. A woman at the far end of the stall offers you something called relish pudding. It's not a pudding in the comforting sense. It's a mash of pickled cabbage, onion, vinegar, and maybe some old ale-soaked bread. You try it. It's cold. It's wet. It's alive with flavor. Not great flavor, but definitely present. You wash it down with a sip of water that tastes suspiciously like it's been stored in a fish barrel. You make a mental note to just stick with ale. Next to the barrels, someone's selling pickled eggs dyed with beet juice, giving them an alarming purple glow. You're peer pressured into trying one. The texture is firm, the yolk chalky, the taste a tangy shock that quickly devolves into something faintly sulfuric. You chase it with a piece of pickled cucumber that's been soaking so long it's turned translucent. Here's a charming detail: some medieval cooks colored their pickles with saffron, nettle juice, or even iron nails, which added both hue and flavor. Historians still debate whether this was for aesthetics or believed to have health benefits. Either way, if it's crunchy and glows in the dark, it probably came from this table. You watch a small dog licking pickle juice off the cobblestones. It wags its tail like this is the best meal of its life. You kind of understand. The vendor gives you a farewell treat. Pickled plums, wrinkled and sticky, flavored with cinnamon and fennel. You suck on one like a strange little candy. It's better than it has any right to be sweet. Sour and spicy all at once. A medieval Sour Patch Kid with notes of church incense. You tuck a few in your pouch, already planning to use them as either a midnight snack or emergency deterrent. As you step away from the barrels, your tongue still buzzing from vinegar, you realize how much these sharp, acidic bites have revived you. They're snacks with a bite, food that wakes you up and punches your taste buds before bedtime. You stretch your arms, burp silently, and continue on. Next up, you hear someone mention nuts roasting over coals. Your ears perk, your stomach, despite everything, grumbles, and your heart, against all logic, dares to believe in medieval snack redemption. Your path veers toward warmth again, not just from the firelight flickering off nearby taverns, but from that unmistakable scent. Sweet, smoky, and just a little burnt. Roasted nuts. Somewhere closer, a pan is being shaken with the enthusiasm of a medieval percussionist. You follow the sound, the smell, and the trail of discarded shells until you find him. The vendor is barefoot, wild-haired, and dressed in layers that might once have been curtains. He grins like a wizard as he flips a broad iron pan over a coal brazier. Inside are almonds and hazelnuts coated in something sticky. Smoke curls around his head like a halo made of barbecue. He scoops a hot handful into a little cone of parchment and hands it to you. "Burnt almonds," he says, a little too proudly. You thank him and immediately juggle the cone because it's boiling lava hot. A nearby child laughs. You glare, then you bite. Crunch, warm, sweet, toasty. Yes, they're slightly burnt, but in that strangely delicious way. The caramelized sugar crackles, and the almond underneath is rich, a little chewy, and deeply satisfying. Nuts were a big deal in medieval Europe, both in cooking and as snacks. Almonds in particular were everywhere, used in sauces, stews, and of course, almond milk. Yes, really. In fact, almond milk was a common replacement for dairy during fasting days, especially among wealthier households. But in the streets, you were more likely to encounter them roasted or candied, sold warm in little bundles or cracked on the spot. Mainstream historians agree that candied nuts were popular among both commoners and nobles, though the sweetening agents varied. Honey for the humble. Sugar, when available, for the elite. And sometimes they were tossed in spices too, like ginger, cinnamon, or even pepper. You pop another almond in your mouth and immediately feel a crunch that's too loud to be edible. Yep, that one was mostly burnt shell. You pick it out discreetly because you're in public and you're classy. To your left, another vendor roasts chestnuts in a rotating drum. The smell is buttery and earthy, like autumn condensed into snack form. You take a small pouch wrapped in cloth and slightly oily from the heat. One bite and your tongue is greeted by softness, sweetness, and the faint taste of smoke. It's like biting into a toasted bread puff with dreams of grandeur. A fringe treat catches your eye: sugared pine nuts. They're tiny, expensive, and coated in what looks like amber. A nobleman nearby buys a handful, then promptly sneezes them all over the cobbles. No one says anything. You pick up one survivor and give it a cautious try. It's unexpectedly floral, and possibly infused with rosewater. Fancy. You remember reading once about Drage's tiny candies made by coating nuts or seeds in sugar, layer after layer until they were like shiny edible marbles. These were luxury items. Sure, but cheaper. Rustic versions often appeared at festivals or feast days, sometimes even thrown from balconies at weddings. Historians still argue whether this was a kind gesture or a weaponized dessert. You chew through the last of your burnt almonds, grateful for their warmth in your now slightly jittery belly. The sugar rush hits like a happy slap, and you feel your steps quicken. Behind another stall, an older man offers herbed nuts. You raise an eyebrow. He explains roasted walnuts dusted with sage and salt. You try one. It tastes like stuffing. Crunchy stuffing. It's odd, but Kind of brilliant. You want more? He refuses to tell you the spice blend. Family secret. He winks. Also, I forgot. One stall over, a boy sells candied hazelnuts strung together on a twine necklace. Snack while you walk, he says. You buy one. Immediately, it gets stuck in your hair. You wear it like a crown of poor decisions. In a quieter corner, you spot a woman with a heavy mortar and pestle, grinding almonds into paste for marzipan. The scent of rose and nut fills the air. She rolls tiny lumps into shapes birds, fruit, and a terrifying pig. You try one shaped like a pear. It's soft, sweet, and a little chewy, like a dessert imagining what fruit tastes like. Historically accurate. Sort of, marzipan was a well-known treat by the late medieval period, though more likely to be found at feast tables than street carts. Still, some crafty vendors made humble versions for special occasions, dyed with beet juice or saffron and sweetened with thickened honey. You're 10 nuts deep now and starting to feel the crunch fatigue. But one last item catches your eye: roasted chickpeas tossed with salt and vinegar. The vendor calls them poor man's peppercorns. You take a handful. Crunchy, sharp, addictive, somewhere between popcorn and punishment. Historians have found references to dried legumes eaten like nuts, especially chickpeas and broad beans, roasted and salted, portable, shelf-stable, and affordable. The medieval trail mix, if you will. You step aside and let the next wave of snackers crowd in. Children shout for sugared almonds. A friar buys a chestnut pouch and immediately disappears into the shadows. A dog barks at a flying walnut. The scene is alive, jittery, and coated in a fine dusting of sugar and ash. You check your pouch crumbs. Shells, and a single burnt hazelnut remain. You eat it anyway. The nut vendors fade behind you, but their warmth lingers on your breath, in your hands, and probably between your teeth. You're feeling oddly energized, slightly sticky, and ready for whatever strange bite comes next, which, judging by the bubbling crock ahead, involves dairy and possibly fermentation, because nothing says let's risk it all like medieval milk products served without refrigeration. You head toward the bubbling sound, a little wary now. After eel pie, pickled garlic, and nuts that could sand a table, you're wondering if your digestive system is still speaking to you. But curiosity's stronger than caution, especially when you smell something rich and milky wafting through the dusk air. There's dairy ahead, comfort food or chaos and curds. You round the corner and find a man standing behind 3 wooden barrels and a plank covered in clay bowls. He's stirring something thick in a pot over embers, humming a tune that sounds vaguely like a warning. You approach. He nods, ladles a scoop of something white and steaming into a shallow bowl, and hands it to you. Cloudy, he says. Eat it warm. You peer into the bowl. It's thick, lumpy, bubbling slightly. You smell sour milk and something vaguely herbal. It quivers like it has a soul. You take a spoonful and hold your breath. The taste is complex, creamy, sour, with a bit of grassy bite. You chew slowly. It's not cheese, not quite yogurt. Something in between. The vendor grins. Curdled, then scalded, he says proudly. Best eaten before it decides otherwise. In medieval times, milk was a gamble. Without refrigeration, it turned fast. But that wasn't a bad thing. Fermented dairy products, curds, cheeses, butter, clotted creams were staples. A way to preserve calories, protein, and fat in something that wouldn't immediately turn into poison. At least, not always. Historians agree that most households didn't drink milk straight unless it came fresh from the animal. It was safer to curdle it, age it, churn it, or boil it into submission. What you've got here is somewhere between live cheese and hot yogurt, and somehow, it's kind of delicious. You glance down at the rest of the plank. There's a lumpy wheel of soft cheese with gray speckles, a bowl of something greenish and foamy, a jug labeled clotted cream but a bit rebellious. You move cautiously. The vendor offers you a bite of a white cube. Snow curd, he says. You take it, it's cool. Sweet. And dusted with nutmeg. A rare treat. You later learn it's made by separating cream from whey, pressing it into a form, and mixing in spices essentially medieval cream cheese. Used at feasts or in bribes. A fringe favorite fermented mare's milk. Not exactly common in medieval Europe proper, but on the fringes in Mongol territories or certain eastern regions, it was considered both a drink and a tonic. You shudder at the thought. No one's offering it tonight, but you suddenly feel grateful for the mild-mannered sheep cheese now softening in your bowl. You try a spoonful of something brownish and sticky, offered with a sly smile. Curds with ale, the vendor says. Popular at wakes. You chew, it's creamy, yes, but also sharp, with a yeasty tang. It tastes like someone spilled beer into their cottage cheese and decided to go with it. Nearby, a young woman sells rounds of fresh butter pressed with carved wooden stamps roses. Animals, saints' faces. The butter's soft, golden, and slightly salty. You're handed a sliver on a wafer. It melts in your mouth like silk. Finally, a snack that doesn't punch back. Another bowl holds runny cheese, warmed slightly over coals like it smells like wet socks left in the sun. But the flavor is mellow, creamy, almost sweet. A whisper of herbs lingers at the aftertaste. Sheep milk, the vendor says. We let it think about its decisions first. Historians still argue whether most dairy was consumed raw or cooked. Many recipes show boiling or baking dairy products with grains, fruit, or spices, making everything from sweet milk porridges to savory cheese pies. Some scholars suggest early custards were born this way, thickened with eggs and honey for the wealthy, with breadcrumbs for everyone else. Someone nearby is stirring a clay pot of posset, a drinkable dessert made from warm milk curdled with wine or ale, then layered with spice. You sip cautiously. It's sweet, rich, and strangely comforting, like drinking warm pudding through a medieval filter. It clings to your throat like affection from a damp cat. You spot a young couple sharing a cheese fritter, little fried balls of curd. Honey and flour? You try one. It's crisp on the outside, molten in the middle, and clearly trying to change your life. A less fortunate experiment appears when someone offers you a spoonful of soured whey soup. You smile, swallow, and immediately wish you could untaste it. Imagine if vinegar and porridge had a falling out, then reunited in bad faith. You recover with another helping of soft cheese topped with chopped pickled herbs. You spread it on a slice of dark rye, the crunch of the bread, the creaminess of the cheese, and the sharpness of the topping create a surprisingly modern combo, like an accidental appetizer at a tavern trying to gentrify. Somewhere in the distance, someone sneezes, and a block of cheese falls off a cart. No one moves to save it. You realize that despite the risks, the dairy scene here is oddly intimate. These are comfort foods. Calorie dense, fat rich, and sometimes still fizzing. They fill you up, warm your bones, and occasionally challenge your immune system in ways it never asked for. You thank the vendor, still chewing slowly, and make your way onward. Your belly now 60% curd and 20% questionable butter. Ahead, a vendor calls out, sweet roots candy carrots, sugar beets. You blink. Candy. Carrots. Welcome to the medieval world of candied vegetables where even your soup ingredients get turned into snacks. You step closer, genuinely intrigued. Candied vegetables. That's new. And bold. The vendor is an elderly man with orange-tinted fingertips and a beard that looks like it's dusted in flour and secrets. He's surrounded by trays of colorful, glossy little chunks. Golden cubes, orange sticks, and something purple that sparkles slightly in the firelight. Nature's candy, he says, grinning like he's just reinvented the turnip. He hands you a sliver of something translucent and orange. You bite in. It's carrot. But not any carrot you've ever known. It's sweet, chewy, and perfumed with rosewater. The texture is part gummy, part jelly bean, and vaguely soap adjacent. Your eyebrows go up despite yourself. It's weird but not bad. In the Middle Ages, sugar was a luxury, but sweet cravings weren't. People got creative. Candied root vegetables were one answer, especially during feast days or fasts when fruit was scarce. Carrots, parsnips, beets, even turnips could be boiled in honey or sugar syrup, dried, and rolled in spice. Think early versions of fruit snacks if your fruit snack had once grown underground. Mainstream historians agree that sucket was the name for this class of treats. Preserved or candied bits served at the end of meals, often in ornate dishes. Nobles showed off with candied ginger and imported citrus peel. But humbler versions existed, especially during holidays, when a street vendor like this one might turn leftovers into something dazzling and chewable. You try another. This one's deep red, probably beetroot. It's sweet, yes, but also earthy. Like someone dipped a candy apple in a garden. You chew slowly. The aftertaste is oddly familiar, like childhood cough syrup and root cellar air. A woman next to you offers a skewer of glazed parsnip. You take a bite. It's firmer than the others, with a mild sweetness and a spicy kick. Maybe clove or pepper. You glance at her. She winks. Trade secret, she says. You wonder if she's the competition. Nearby, a tray of sugar-dusted vegetable crisps draws a small crowd. These aren't the airy chips you might imagine. They're more like thin, dried shards of turnip, soaked in honey. Then dried by the fire, you nibble a shard. It's brittle, sweet, and oddly nutty. Here's a fringe detail some records suggest that peasants occasionally dipped carrots in honey and roasted them on skewers early caramelization, before anyone knew that word. They weren't aiming for dessert, they were trying to mask bitterness. The result? A surprising treat. You spot a child crunching on a long strip of what looks like jerky, but turns out to be candied salsify. You'd forgotten about that vegetable. Apparently, medieval vendors hadn't. You try one. It's chewy, fibrous, and sugary. Like if celery had a baby with a Tootsie Roll and refused to apologize. You don't love it, but you're impressed by the audacity. Historians still argue whether these candied veggies were truly considered desserts or more like medicinal bites. Some were stored with herbs mint, fennel, even thyme, and were believed to aid digestion. Others were simply the best way to make a parsnip behave like a plum. Next, the vendor hands you something wrapped in parchment. Radish balls, he says. You brace yourself. They're soft, rolled in coarse sugar, and flavored with lemon peel. It's unexpected zingy, sharp, sweet, and a little cleansing, like eating dessert and brushing your teeth at the same time. One tray holds sugar-soaked horseradish, sliced thin and dried into curls. For brave souls, the sign says, you try one because your curiosity is clearly stronger than your wisdom. It's sweet at first, then fiery. Your eyes water. A nearby vendor hands you a candied cucumber to calm the fire. It tastes like bubble gum made from disappointment. You pause for breath and take in the scene. Kids are giggling as they chew on beet lollies. A man is loudly comparing carrot candy to his late wife's jam. A noble-looking woman delicately eats sugared leek coins like they're macarons. Everyone is crunching something. A bowl of candied garlic sits mostly untouched. You take one. It's sticky. It tastes like caramelized sin. You quietly slide the rest into your sleeve. Suddenly, a boy runs up yelling about rosemary turnip fudge. You chase him to a different stall, where, sure enough, soft squares of pale yellow confection wait in a bowl. You try one. It's buttery, slightly gritty, and tastes like the ghost of Christmas dinner. Not bad, just confusing. Back at the original stall, you're handed what looks like a tiny rosebud. It's candied fennel root, wrapped in a petal of beet syrup. You chew carefully. The flavor is sweet and anise-forward. Like licorice grew legs and started writing poetry. Some scholars suggest these types of snacks weren't just for taste, they were social currency. You could impress guests with exotic sweets, even if all you had were root vegetables and good timing. And in a world where refined sugar was almost worth more than gold. Honey and cleverness were king. You nod to the vendor and purchase a handful of candied carrot sticks to take with you. They'll probably melt into your pouch, but that's a problem for future you. As you leave the sticky, root-based rainbow behind, you realize something this entire snack category came from making do. No fruit candy a beet, no sugar boil it in honey, no dignity. Eat another sweet turnip and call it festive. You wipe your fingers, lick the last bit of rosewater from your teeth, and drift forward, already hearing whispers of dried fruit stalls ahead. You think you spot a tray of sugared apples. You think you smell cloves. You also think your teeth might revolt soon. But for now, one more snack can't hurt. Probably. You move toward a stall that seems quieter than the rest, but not for lack of business. The air here is different, less smoky, more dusty, as if time itself paused to settle a fine coating of powdered sugar over everything. You catch the sweet, slightly fermented scent of dried fruit. Your jaw tightens instinctively. This is going to be either delightful or dental. The vendor is a lean man with a drooping hat and the posture of someone who's lifted one too many barrels of plums. He's slicing through leathery sheets of something dark and sticky. Spiced pear leather, he says, holding out a strip. Sweetened with wine and a bit of sugar. You nod and take it. The texture is challenging, sticky, flexible, slightly gritty, but the flavor warm, earthy, with a pleasant tang. A little like fig jam with commitment issues. You chew thoughtfully, wondering how much of this is fruit and how much is preservation panic. In the Middle Ages, dried fruit was a prized snack and sweetener. especially during colder months when fresh produce vanished and root vegetables took over everything. Apples, pears, prunes, figs, and dates were sliced thin and dried over low heat or strung near hearths, absorbing both warmth and whatever was burning that week. Mainstream historians agree that drying fruit was one of the most effective preservation techniques available, especially in regions without easy access to sugar. But once sugar and honey entered the picture, dried fruits got an upgrade: candied, rolled, spiced, and eventually turned into what could only generously be called confections. You approach another tray and pick up a sugared apple slice. It's curled like a dried flower, dusted with something pale and granular. Sugar, probably, hopefully. You bite in. The taste is complex sweet, then tart, then a bit moldy? Or is that spice you squint at the tray? That one's been out a few days. The vendor admits, too casually, but it's still got bite. You nod, still chewing, because spitting out food in front of a medieval vendor is how duels get started. To your right, a young girl holds out a skewer of figs, each one split and filled with almond paste. Festive, she says. You take one. It's chewy, grainy, and slightly floral. The almond paste has been mixed with honey and a trace of rosewater. It's like eating a tiny, squishy cake made by bees. You spot a bowl of prunes soaked in ale. You try one. It's soft, plump, and surprisingly boozy. You feel your knees relax. One unusual tidbit: some dried fruits were restored before eating, soaked in wine or ale, then warmed over fire, sometimes served with cheese or fried dough, a kind of dessert soup or rustic compote. You see one bubbling in a small pot near the stall. Plums, raisins, and slivers of quince. It smells incredible, like burnt sugar. Cloves and regret. You try a spoonful. The texture's thick, but the flavor's complex, spiced, comforting, like fruit stew wearing a spiced cloak. You suddenly understand why people might fight over the last fig in winter. There's a whole section of raisins, tiny, big, golden, shriveled, and somehow glittery. A boy is eating them like candy, tossing them in the air and catching them in his mouth with startling precision. You try one, then another. They're chewy, sweet, and just a little gritty. You find a stem still attached to one. Bonus fiber. Historians still argue whether dried fruit snacks were considered indulgent treats or daily necessities. In wealthier households, yes, they were plated on trenchers or rolled in sugar, served with nuts and wine. But even the common folk knew the value of a well-dried apple or a handful of raisins to chew through a long walk. A tray of fruit wafers catches your eye-pressed sheets of dried pear and plum, layered with herbs and crushed seeds. You nibble a corner. It's like medieval fruit leather, dense and chewy, with an oddly savory finish. You kind of love it. You kind of want to throw it into a pie and see what happens. Another vendor offers candied citron, which you recognize from modern holiday cakes. It's bitter, intensely sweet, and seems designed to last forever. You eat one slice and feel it sticking to your molars like a sugar-based sealant. Here's a charming fringe fact during feast days. Noble tables would sometimes serve entire dried fruit sculptures, towers of figs, almond-stuffed dates, and candied lemon peels arranged like a sweet-smelling chessboard. Did they taste good? Possibly. Did they impress guests? Absolutely. You try a dried date filled with clove-studded cheese. It's aggressive. You wash it down with a swig of weak cider and move on. At the far end of the table, you find apple cheese. No actual cheese involved, just apples boiled down with honey into a dense, sliceable paste. You take a wedge. It's sticky, tart, and satisfying in a way that makes you wish it came in sandwich form. You watch as an older woman crumbles dried pear into a bowl of curds. Dessert, she says, or breakfast, or both. The air here is heady with the scent of dried fruit, old honey, and crushed spices. You feel like you've wandered into a pantry dream. Your teeth hurt a little. Your stomach buzzes with fermented sugar, and yet you can't stop. You nibble one last strip of dried plum, rub the sugar dust from your fingers, and step back. The lights feel warmer now. Your pace slows, but you're not done yet. You hear bells. A tax cart, maybe? Or a bailiff. Or more interestingly, someone whispering about illegal snacks. Because what's sweeter than a forbidden pastry? You follow the sound of muttered voices and clinking coins, your steps crunching softly over the scattered stems and crumbs of the dried fruit market. The atmosphere changes. The laughter dims. You're in a quieter corner now, less festive, more furtive. Someone ahead lowers a pie into a basket and covers it with a cloth, like it's contraband. You blink. Are snacks being smuggled? The man notices you watching and gives a subtle nod toward a darker alley. Proper spice pies if you've coin, he whispers. You don't ask questions. You just follow. Around the corner, tucked beside a stable wall and a soot-darkened chimney, you find a makeshift stall where the air smells expensive, warm cinnamon, real saffron, maybe even nutmeg. It's oddly thrilling. You approach a woman arranging tiny pastries on a cloth. No questions, she says. Not unkindly. No haggling. These have been taxed twice already. You pick up a tart. It's delicate, smaller than a hen's egg. Its filling gleaming under a faint glaze. You take a bite. Rich, spiced, sweet and savory all at once. Possibly lamb, possibly dried fruit. Definitely cloves. It tastes like a feast in hiding. This is your first real encounter with the dark world of snack taxes. Mainstream historians confirm that medieval towns often regulated who could sell food, where it could be sold, and what ingredients were taxed. Spices in particular were watched closely. Saffron, pepper, cinnamon, all imported, all valuable, and often used to flaunt wealth. Too much spice in your pie. You might be accused of dodging levies, or worse, impersonating nobility. Not a great way to keep your head. Vendors got clever. Spice pies were sometimes sold under different names, with cinnamon replaced by local bark or toasted grain, nutmeg swapped for burnt rosemary. Some treats were only allowed on feast days, others banned outright in fasting periods. The result? A black market of forbidden pastries. You try a second tart. This one is packed with almonds and citrus peel. It tastes heavenly and also possibly illegal. The woman quickly rewraps the tray when a pair of guards walks by, their armor clinking softly. A nearby stall sells mock saffron cakes yellow, crumbly pastries dyed with ground marigold petals instead of the real deal. Just as good, the vendor says, lying with his entire face. You try one. It's not bad, but it's not saffron. One of the more fascinating debates among scholars whether food laws were genuinely about public health or just economic control. Some argue these regulations helped protect buyers from spoiled goods or fake spices. Others insist it was pure profit, with guilds and officials ensuring their cut of every pie crust and peppercorn. Probably both. You overhear a man explaining that pies with more than three meats were taxed as luxury items. A pastry with venison, pork, and poultry. That's noble fare. If a peasant sells one, it's confiscated. You glance around warily at the three-bite mystery tart now sitting heavy in your stomach. You might be in noble pie territory. Someone pulls a cloth from a stack of tiny folded pastries, each oozing syrup. Illegal fritters, the girl says, eyes darting. Banned last Lent for causing unholy distraction. You don't laugh, you just eat. It's delicious. Soft dough fried in honey oil and spiced with coriander. It distracts you thoroughly. Here's a fun fringe fact in some places. Pie contents were inspected by watchmen. Random food patrols would crack open a tart to ensure it matched what the vendor claimed. Mutton pie. It better not be badger. And yes, that happened. People cooked with whatever meat they could trap, including beaver tail, considered fish by church logic. It's chewy. You try a beaver tail-shaped cookie, hopefully symbolic. You pass a man selling church-safe pies, which are plain, dry, and extremely not fun. You take a respectful bite. It tastes like guilt and flour. Another vendor whispers of a hidden meat pasty, wrapped in layers of sweetened dough to mask its savory heart. You try one. It's a fascinating trick. Sweet on the outside, beefy on the inside. Confusing but comforting. Like eating dessert with a grudge. Nearby, a woman peels dried fruit from a tart and pockets the filling. Sugar tax, she mutters. But the crust's free. You nod because somehow that logic makes perfect sense here. Historians still argue whether these food restrictions improved culinary creativity or just made everyone anxious. Some say the best medieval dishes came from having to fake, hide, or remix ingredients under pressure. Others believe we missed out on hundreds of glorious pastries because someone didn't want to pay a spice fee. A boy wanders past selling miniature pepper cakes wrapped in waxed linen. 2 for a penny. 1 if you're quiet. You buy 2. They're fiery, dry, and oddly invigorating. You glance up and see a constable sniffing the air. You tuck your illicit tart deeper into your cloak and casually nibble a bite of legal cheese you've been hiding like an edible alibi. The scene feels strangely modern pop-up vendors, shady transactions, people bargaining in whispers over what's essentially a stuffed cookie. You start to admire the underground snack economy. These aren't just treats. They're statements, little edible acts of rebellion. You walk on slowly, the illicit flavors lingering on your tongue, warm spices, sweet glazes, savory secrets, all hidden in plain sight. As you step back into the main market path, someone calls out about leftover feast food. Saints' Day pies, stale wafers, and globs of refried pudding are up for grabs. You're not sure if your stomach can handle it, but your curiosity absolutely can. Because nothing says late-night snack mistake like trampled festival leftovers. The light has changed again, less fire glow, more lantern shadows. The market's bustle has thinned to a late-night murmur, but you can still hear the clatter of wooden platters, the distant bang of a tankard dropped by accident or celebration, and the unmistakable voice of someone hawking saintly scraps from a greasy tablecloth. You drift toward the call, past a pile of torn bunting and a puddle that smells suspiciously like mead and regret. There's a makeshift stand set up near the steps of what was probably a chapel earlier today, and is now a buffet for leftovers from the recent feast day. The vendor, a red cheeked man with an apron that's more patch than fabric, points at a pie missing its lid. 3 fillings left, he announces. Maybe 4. You sidle up and accept a wedge handed to you on a splintery board. The crust is thick and crumbles into flakes and mystery. You bite in. The filling is complex. Goose. Maybe a little fishy. Also something sweet. Possibly apple. And, of course, spice. So much spice. Feast leftovers were serious business in the medieval world. After big church celebrations, wedding feasts, or seasonal festivals, whatever remained got redistributed, sometimes charitably, sometimes for a price. And that redistribution meant pie crusts were refilled, bread was rebaked, and meats were chopped fine and folded into new creations. You're now eating something that was once 6 different meals, and you respect that kind of recycling. Mainstream historians confirm that feast days were culinary marathons. Tables groaned with everything from roast swan to almond cream tarts, and very little went to waste. Even the upper crust of society and of pies knew that those leftovers were valuable. In towns, this bounty would trickle down through servants, cooks, and opportunistic vendors who set up shop the day after, offering reheated grace. You chew another bite and find something chewy dried fruit or tendon. You decide not to investigate. You swallow like a professional. A nearby vendor pulls apart a stale honey bun and stuffs it with reheated cheese. Bread's still good, he explains. If you pretend it's not, you nod and accept a sample. It tastes like dessert and desperation, but the cheese has melted into the sugar in a way that feels almost deliberate. You spot another treat, flattened pastries from a saint's procession. Now soggy but still sweet. They're soaked in rose water and spiced wine, then fried a second time and served warm. You try one. It's soft, sticky, and incredibly rich. You don't stop after the first bite. A fringe detail surfaces in your mind in some places. Leftover festival foods were blessed again before redistribution, especially if they came from church kitchens. You chew more thoughtfully. You may be consuming something that's been blessed 3 times and fried twice. Holy cholesterol. A child walks by with what looks like a meat turnover filled with mincemeat and peas. She bites in and grins through missing teeth. You wonder if this is her first or 5th snack of the night. Behind the main vendor, someone stirs a pot of something unrecognizable. Pudding stew, he says. Bread, beef drippings, apples, onions, and pie scraps. You blink. He offers a spoon. You hesitate. You eat. And somehow it works. Sweet. Savory. And exactly like what would happen if a medieval pantry exploded in a cauldron. Historians still argue whether these leftover concoctions were truly beloved or just tolerated. Some claim that the creativity of post-feast meals was a source of culinary pride, while others suggest it was more about survival and thrift. Still, you can't deny the inventiveness or the flavor. It's rough around the edges, but weirdly comforting. A group of friars pass by with little bundles wrapped in cloth. One of them waves a loaf dog a bread crust stuffed with mashed root vegetables and drizzled with honey. You grab one for yourself. It's dry, chewy, and oddly delicious. Like someone tried to build a meatless hot dog out of bread and effort. You sit for a moment on the chapel step, your snack in hand, watching the last of the feast vendors pack up. Someone spills a bowl of jelly-like custard. A dog immediately claims it. A woman laughs so hard she drops a half-eaten tart. You catch it before it hits the ground. She gives you a thumbs up and a shrug that says, "It's probably fine." Somewhere nearby, a lone musician starts playing a slow tune on a battered pipe. You chew and listen. Everything tastes a little smoky now, a little spiced. It's hard to tell where one snack ends and another begins. Feast day leftovers are like edible patchwork quilts, stitched together with sugar, grease, and hope. You wipe your hands on your sleeve pointlessly, because they're already stained with jam and butter, and get up. The vendors are folding tables, brushing crumbs into the street for the rats and saints to share. You catch one last treat on your way out, a dry pear slice stuffed with fried cheese and cinnamon. You eat it like a relic. As you wander back toward the main market drag, your feet stick slightly to the cobble's residue of celebration, probably, and you hear distant shouts and laughter from the taverns. There's one voice you recognize, the jester, and he's talking about food that turns your teeth blue. Time for a little mischief with your midnight snack. You follow the laughter. It's unmistakable, the high, cackling chorus of someone who knows how to work a crowd. You duck past a hanging cloth banner still sticky with spilled piment, and find yourself in a narrow square lit with swinging lanterns and a faint smell of burnt sugar. And there he is, the jester. Garish hat. Bells. A grin like he knows the punchline to your entire life. He's holding a tray. "Sweeties for smarties," he cries. "Treats for troublemakers. Bites for the bold." You walk closer, warily. He spots you, winks, and waves you over with a candy in each hand. "For the brave," he says, and presses a small, dark cube into your palm. Don't chew, let it melt. Unless you like surprises, you do as told. The cube is cold, firm, and smells like licorice and vinegar. You let it rest on your tongue. It dissolves slowly, and as it does, the flavor changes from sweet to herbal, to salty, to something that feels like you're licking an alchemy experiment. Your eyes water. The jester beams. These, apparently, are Jester's food gags, novelty snacks crafted to entertain, confuse, and sometimes mildly alarm. They existed in real medieval feasts, especially in court circles where food wasn't just sustenance, it was show. Pies with live birds, apples stuffed with anchovy paste, custards dyed bright green with herbs or powdered metals. Not always safe, not always delicious, but always memorable. Mainstream historians confirm that court jesters and kitchen fools often collaborated with cooks to pull off edible pranks during feast days and festivals. A pie that shrieked, a roast that bled beet juice, a tart that changed colors thanks to a dye baked into its crust. Food was theater, and the audience was often very confused. The jester now holds out a bowl of tiny red spheres. "Devilberries," he says ominously. You take one. It's a candied cranberry. At first, then the pepper hits. Your mouth floods with heat. The jester doubles over in laughter. You wheeze, tears streaming, and nod. "Excellent," he says. You passed. Another tray offers what looks like little sugar-dusted pebbles. "Candy stones," he says. You take one. It's rock hard. You bite and suddenly your teeth are black. He hands you a shard of mirror. You look like you've been chewing coal. He laughs again, delighted. "Edible ink." He whispers, "Charcoal and anise." Cleans the teeth. "Allegedly." A fringe favorite, reverse apples. The jester lifts a fruit that looks perfectly normal, then slices it to reveal that the inside has been scooped and stuffed with mashed onions and sweet mustard paste. Not for children, he warns. You take a sliver. It's not as bad as it sounds sharp, savory, sweet. Like the medieval version of an apple prank at a Renaissance fair. Nearby, a tall woman in motley stripes sells tongue benders, long twists of sweetened dough laced with mint, salt, and vinegar. You try one. It's a roller coaster of flavor. Your mouth feels cold, then hot, then a little numb. You wonder if this is how dragons feel after licking a castle. Historians still argue whether these food pranks were everyday entertainment or reserved for high feasts and court banquets. Some suggest jesters had a culinary role beyond jokes, consulting on how to surprise guests through taste, texture, and illusion. Others claim these stories are exaggerated tales cooked up after the fact to give courtly life more flavor. You bite into a tartlet the jester hands you. For lovers, he says, it tastes like cinnamon and dates at first, then turns salty. You can't identify the filling. He won't tell. You decide you're better off not knowing. Nearby, a group of musicians passes around a plate of fool's fudge, a mix of nuts, candied parsnip, and crushed peppercorn. It's spicy, crunchy, and oddly satisfying. You help yourself, wiping your hands out a scarf that's already absorbed about 4 other snacks. Someone else offers a magic nut. You crack it open. Inside is a raisin. You look confused. That's the joke, the vendor says. You sigh and eat it anyway. One small boy bites into a pastry and starts screaming. Not in pain, but excitement. His tongue is blue. The jester whoops and tosses another into the air. A wave of children stampedes to the tray. Soon the whole square is filled with giggling, color-stained mouths. It looks like someone held a medieval crayon tasting. You sit down on a low barrel and munch on a bit of dyed bread, dyed with boiled cabbage water and crushed berries. It's not great, but it's deeply purple. And that's apparently the goal. Beside you, a noble woman chews on a licorice stick, while dabbing at her wine-stained lips with a lace cloth. She looks unimpressed, but keeps eating. One final trick awaits the jester unveils a roast that looks like a rabbit until he slices it open and reveals it's all pastry and sugared almond paste. You laugh. He bows. Don't trust your eyes, he says. Especially after midnight. There's something oddly comforting about this edible mischief. These snacks don't aim for perfection. They aim for reaction, surprise, delight, confusion, laughter. They're meant to wake you up just long enough to appreciate the ridiculous. You stand wiping your mouth, your tongue still vaguely spicy and your teeth probably still black. You tip your head to the jester, who tosses you one last treat around candy with layers. Keep licking, he says. It's got a story in the middle. You pocket it. You're not ready for stories just yet. But soon. Now. As you step away from the laughter and the sticky-faced crowd, you hear something else, the low, steady crackle of a tavern fire, the scent of roasting meat, and a voice calling out. Rats on the spit. Half price if you guess wrong. You sigh. You were hoping for something normal, but in the medieval world of junk food, normal is just another illusion. You follow the scent of roasted meat charred edges, crackling fat, a little too much smoke, and wind up in a low-lit courtyard outside a rough-hewn tavern. The wooden sign overhead hangs crookedly on rusted chains and depicts what might be a pig or possibly a heavily padded rat. Judging by the smell wafting from the open windows, the latter wouldn't be a surprise. Inside, it's chaos wrapped in warmth. Long tables, mostly sticky, mugs of ale clink, spill and refill in a rhythm older than most of the building. Someone's singing a sea shanty in a key that shouldn't exist. And in the corner, a rotisserie. Yes, a spit. With something small and dark spinning slowly over an open fire. You lean in. Definitely rat. The cook sees you watching and grins. Field rat, he says. Caught this morning? Washed twice. He pokes it with a skewer. The skin crackles. Want one? Of course you do. At this point, your dignity's long been pickled, baked, and flambéed. He slides the glistening rodent off the spit and hands it over with a slice of flatbread. It's hot, oily, and smells like chicken trying to pass a survival test. You take a bite. The skin is crisp, the meat stringy, and there's a wild, gamey flavor that reminds you of desperation and pepper. Surprisingly, you don't hate it. Field rats were indeed eaten in medieval Europe, especially by the poorest or during times of scarcity. In cities where meat was expensive and pest control non-existent. Some vendors got creative. Tavern delicacies were often just animals small enough to catch, fry, and sell before anyone asked too many questions. Mainstream historians acknowledge the consumption of rats, especially in post-famine eras or under siege conditions. However, not everyone sees them as desperate food. In rural areas, they were sometimes considered a rustic treat, fried, spiced, and served on skewers they made for easy street food. Your rat on a stick has been dusted in what tastes like dried sage and maybe a bit of mustard seed. It's greasy. Sure, but flavorful. You'd rank it somewhere between squirrel and very ambitious chicken. The tavern cook now gestures to another tray. Try the mystery fritters, he says. 3 meats. One guess? You pick one up. It's roughly spherical, hot from the fire, and smells promising. The texture inside is soft ground meat. Herbs, maybe onion. It's savory, rich, and definitely hiding something chewy. You swallow before you think too hard. Is this pigeon? He shakes his head. Close, cat. You choke slightly. He grins. Kidding, mostly. A fringe favorite from taverns like this wench stew. A dubious blend of leftover meats, root vegetables, and spices dumped into a pot and simmered until it was thick enough to eat with your hands. You see it now, a bubbling cauldron of browns and beiges. You ask for a spoonful. It tastes like beef, barley, and ancient secrets. Not terrible. Historians still argue whether tavern food was genuinely consumed by the average medieval worker or more of a rare indulgence. Some taverns offered decent meals, hearty stews, fresh bread, hot ale. Others served whatever could be scavenged, stretched, or disguised with a bit of lard and bravado. A scrawny man beside you orders something called devil's pie. You raise an eyebrow. The server brings out a slab of blackened pastry with what looks like boiled egg, chopped meat, and pickled onions inside. He takes a bite and tears up. That's the horseradish. He croaks. Joyfully. You try a forkful. It's fiery, messy, and oddly satisfying. You're not even sure what the meat is, probably not rat this time, but It's been marinated in ale, spiced within an inch of its life, and baked in a crust that's as dense as armor. You drink some ale to balance the burn. It's dark, thick, and tastes vaguely of smoke and roasted grain. The tavern's own brew, probably made in the back room or possibly the cellar. You hope it didn't start as mop water. Someone nearby tries to pay for their meal with a song. The barkeep listens for 30 seconds, then throws a carrot at him. You get stew, she says. Next verse better rhyme. You join a small group sharing what they call scrape bread. It's a flatbread covered in whatever's been scraped from pans, platters, or the bottom of the roasting pot. Oil, burnt cheese, bits of meat. You bite in. Hey, it's smoky, salty, and crunchy with mysterious delight. A medieval pizza minus the tomato? And the pizza. You lean back, full and slightly delirious. Your face is warm from the fire. Your hands glisten with grease. Someone passes around a platter of pickled pig's feet. You pass. Here's a curious tidbit. Taverns were often the experimental kitchens of the time. Without guild restrictions or the stiff rules of noble feasts, tavern cooks could get weird, and weird meant delicious or dangerous. Sometimes both. You try one last bite of rat, now lukewarm, and chase it with a handful of fried root crisp from a nearby plate. Then, as you're wiping your mouth with your sleeve, you hear a soft clang behind the bar. A monk appears, silent and barefoot, carrying a tray of golden dough balls. He sets them down, nods once, and vanishes into the night. The cook shrugs. Monastery leftovers. He says, fried custard bread. Don't ask how we got 'em. You take one. It's sweet, creamy inside, crisp outside, possibly divine. You smile. The jester was right, never trust your eyes. You stand up, pat your belly, and nod to the rat in the spit. Still turning in solemn rotation. Somewhere nearby. Bells chime again. A distant abbey. Maybe. Or a signal that the snack pilgrimage isn't over yet. Because if monks are frying dough in the dead of night, you'd better go see for yourself. You step back out into the cooler night air, blinking through the haze of tavern smoke and frying oil. Your clothes now thoroughly seasoned with a medley of medieval aromas. The path ahead glimmers faintly with torchlight and dew, and just beyond the noise of the marketplace, you hear something soft, no chanting, no bells, no shouting. Just the quiet shush of footsteps on stone and the rustle of monastic robes. It takes a few minutes of following the quiet to find the abbey's back gate. It's modest, low-built, and nearly swallowed by ivy. But the warm flicker of firelight and the unmistakable scent of baking dough tell you you're in the right place. You peer through a crack in the gate. Inside the small cloister kitchen, figures in robes move silently, focused. One of them is rolling dough. Another tends to a wide, shallow pan of hot oil. There are no jokes, no sales pitches, only the gentle bubbling of fat and the careful dusting of flour. You ease the gate open. No one stops you. Welcome to the secret world of monastery junk food. Contrary to the modern image of endless fasting and bland porridge, monks and nuns in medieval Europe could absolutely throw down in the kitchen, especially when feast days allowed indulgence. And while they followed rules, those rules left plenty of room for culinary creativity, especially when it came to baked goods and deep-fried wonders. The figure at the stove ladles a puff of golden dough onto a cloth. You accept it with reverence, It's warm, feather light, and smells of honey and something vaguely citrusy. You take a bite. It crunches, then yields into air and soft sweetness. There's a trace of cardamom or maybe just mint in a honey glaze so delicate you almost miss it. It tastes like the kind of snack you'd dream about during Lent. Mainstream historians agree that monastic kitchens were surprisingly advanced, especially those in well-funded abbeys. They had herb gardens, spice collections, even imported sugar in some cases. They wrote cookbooks. They recorded quantities, techniques, and often produced food for sale cheese, ale, bread, pastries. The monks hear culinary pros hiding behind vows of silence and spotless aprons. Another monk offers you a small dish deep-fried cheese curds, sprinkled with salt and dried thyme. You chew slowly. They're chewy, salty, and intensely satisfying, like mozzarella sticks from a universe with more prayers and fewer menus. A young novice approaches with a tray of small, square pastries. Ratafia tarts, he whispers, for the prior's nightcap. You try one. It's almondy, rich, and laced with something faintly alcoholic, possibly fortified wine, possibly holy water. You don't ask. A fascinating fringe detail. Many abbeys experimented with preservation. Fruits steeped in honey, roots dried and stored with herbs, and syrups reduced until they could coat spoons like jam. You try a spoonful of quince preserve on a bit of fried dough. It tastes like sunshine trapped in sugar. In the far corner, a monk fries what looks like ribbons of dough. He pulls them out with tongs, dusts them in ground nuts and spices, then layers them into a small clay bowl. You're handed one. It's light, flaky, and gently sweetened. A whisper of cinnamon, a hint of clove. The crunch is satisfying without being aggressive. You pause after each bite, like the food itself is inviting contemplation. Historians still argue whether these monastic snacks were for personal indulgence or community service. Some records suggest friars offered treats to the poor on holy days. Others hint at secret feasts behind cloister doors, especially when the abbot was feeling generous or absent. You sip from a warm cup of almond milk steeped with fennel and honey. It's soothing, oddly modern. The kind of thing that would cost $9 in a trendy cafe and come with a hand-drawn swan in the foam. A bell chimes softly, and the monks begin to clean. No shouting, no fuss, just efficient sweeping, folding, wiping. One older monk, perhaps the cook himself, places a final piece of pastry on your cloth napkin. Abbey fry, he murmurs. From leftover gruel. Don't judge. You eat it. It's oddly good. The texture is chewy, the flavor faintly nutty, sweetened just enough to be pleasant. Waste not, want not. You glance around. No one's laughing. No one's selling. Yet you feel more welcome here than anywhere else tonight. It's not just the food, it's the piece of it. The quiet joy of simple ingredients turned sacred by intention and patience. As you step back through the gate into the cool night air, you feel the warmth of the kitchen still in your fingers, the flavors still on your tongue, and maybe, just maybe, a soft nudge of contentment behind your ribs. You pause in the street and look back once. A single monk, silhouetted in the glow of the hearth, gives a slow nod. Then the door closes. You walk on, hands sticky, heart full, stomach confused, and then, like a final whisper, your nose catches something familiar and far more chaotic, the scent of midnight meat pies. Because if you think the medieval craving ends when the market closes, you've never met the after-hours food scene. The streets are quieter now. The crowds have thinned, the fires dimmed to embers, and even the jesters have taken their final bows. But you're still out here, chasing one last bite like some half-dazed pilgrim of indigestion. Your senses, dulled by spiced wine and fried cheese, suddenly snap back to life at the waft of warm meat and pastry. You've found it. The medieval version of the all-night diner, a crooked little shack wedged between two shuttered shops, lit by a single oil lamp swaying in the breeze. Above the door, a soot-covered board reads, "After Bell Bakes." The place smells of onions, pepper, meat, and melted fat. You step inside. A heavy curtain slaps closed behind you. You are now fully committed. The woman behind the counter barely looks up. "Hot pies or hot regrets?" she asks. You blink. She smirks. "Thought so." She pulls a steaming hand pie from a tray and slaps it onto a slab of wood. It hisses as the crust cracks slightly. "Meat," she says. "Type's a mystery. Ask no questions." You nod and take a bite. It's hot, scalding, even. The crust is flaky, greasy, and slightly overbaked. The filling minced something heavily seasoned, with tiny green flecks that could be herbs or grass. There's a peppery bite, a fatty richness, and a feeling like your arteries are being hugged by a medieval butcher. It's divine. These pies are the last line of defense against an empty stomach after a long day of surviving. They're the original late-night snack portable, filling and slightly dangerous. Mainstream historians agree that pie stands and bake shops near taverns or gates would often open late for travelers, guards, and anyone too drunk or too poor to have eaten properly at dinner. The fillings were usually whatever was left, scraps of meat, onions, mashed beans, or even eggs and cheese tossed together, spiced up, wrapped in dough, and baked hard enough to survive a sword fight. You take another bite and hit a chewy bit. Hopefully tendon. Hopefully. The woman behind the counter pushes a bowl of brownish stew toward another customer, who groans happily and tips back a crust of bread to dip it. "Pottage for the brave," she says. "Thick enough to stand a spoon." You glance at the pot bubbling by the fire. It's got meat, definitely. Also lentils, barley, maybe cabbage, and something orange that might have started as a carrot but gave up halfway through. It smells good, though. You accept a ladle's worth. It's hot, salty, and oddly satisfying, as if someone slow-cooked thrift and turned it into a bedtime blanket. A man nearby unwraps a boil bun, a dense ball of dough stuffed with mashed peas and pork bits, then boiled in a cloth sack. He eats it like an apple, humming through his nose. A fringe snack shows up next black paste. Not its official name, but that's what it is, dark rye spread with thick lard, sprinkled with garlic salt and a whisper of dried herbs. She hands you a slice. You bite in. It's gritty, rich, and tastes like winter survival. You're not alone. A few others crowd into the little bake shack travelers. Tavern dwellers, a boy holding a wooden sword, and a woman clutching a half-drunk clay jug. Everyone's quietly chewing. No one talks. No one needs to. You reach the bottom of your stew bowl and scrape up a last bit of barley and beef scrap. You're tempted to lick the spoon. You don't. You're noble like that. Historians still argue whether late-night snacking in the Middle Ages was common or occasional. Some believe the average person ate early and went to bed hungry. Others suggest that in cities and during festivals, the food never really stopped, just morphed into leftovers and dough-wrapped dreams. One theory claims early bread gates operated well into the night, selling stale loaves and oven-charred bits to night workers and travelers. You believe it, because the scene around you feels timeless, human, hungry, half asleep. Someone near the fire unwraps a bundle of cold roast onions and ale sauce and passes you one. You nod, bite in, and let the sweetness and umami sink into your soul. It tastes like midnight honesty. The pie lady tosses you a final treat: crust crisps, burnt shards of pastry brushed with leftover jam and baked again. You chew one. It crackles like parchment. It's perfect. A cat appears, stares at you silently, then steals a chunk of pie and vanishes. No one stops it. You sip a warm mug of weak ale left near the fire. It's flat, slightly sour, but it helps settle everything that's been sloshing around in your stomach for the last 6 hours. You lean back, full but not uncomfortable, and realize this is the moment. The final bite, the final flavor, the end of the edible journey. The fire crackles. The pie woman hums to herself. The cat returns and curls around your leg. It's warm. And just this once, nothing weird is happening. You smile, because this right here is medieval comfort food. Not glamorous, not elegant, just hot, hearty, greasy, and exactly what your overworked, oversalted body needed before sleep. You rise. You thank the woman. She nods and tosses another crust crisp at the cat. And as you step back into the night, full belly, sticky hands, and mind buzzing with memories of spiced turnips and beet tarts, you realize something. The Middle Ages had junk food. Weird, wonderful, occasionally terrifying junk food. And you've eaten most of it. You step slowly now. The cobbled path beneath your feet worn smoother somehow. Maybe because you're lighter in spirit or just heavier in the gut. Your cloak smells of fried onion, roasted meat, pickled everything, and a memory of cheese you'd prefer not to name. Around you, the market is truly closing. Torches are burning low. Stalls sit empty. Tables scraped clean. Only the occasional whisper of wind and the crackle of a dying fire accompany you now. But there it is, your final stop. A pie vendor, barely visible behind a half-lowered shutter. Catching the last few midnight stragglers like you, those clinging to the foolish hope that one more bite might make a difference. The kind of snack that doesn't fill the belly but fills the moment. A final comfort. He sees you, nods, slides a small pie across the ledge. Hot, he said, and just this side of edible. You smile and you bite in. The crust is soft, the filling still warm. It tastes like everything you've eaten tonight distilled into one last mouthful herbs. Onion, meat probably, and that familiar medieval mix of spice and starch, comfort and chaos. You chew slowly, gratefully. This is late-night medieval craving in its purest form. Somewhere beyond the gate, a watch bell rings marking a new hour, the official curfew. And yet here you are, sneaking one more snack before the candle burns out. Historians still argue whether most medieval folk snacked late into the night. Some accounts suggest 2 solid meals a day, one late morning, one in the evening. Others describe supplemental bites for workers, monks, and those burning candles at both ends like the scribes, cooks, and night guards, food like time, bent around necessity. And necessity, in this case, it was desire. A sleepy, slightly unhinged desire for salt and heat, for grease and sweetness. For junk food, you lick the last crumbs from your thumb, tuck the pie paper into your pocket, and wander through the alleys now near empty. A stray cat watches you pass, probably judging your choices. You nod to it respectfully. A fringe fact floats to mind in some towns. Vendors were fined for selling food after curfew. Too much noise on too many fights. Too many pies flying during midnight arguments. But enforcement was spotty. People were always hungry, especially when they were drunk, cold, or celebrating. And so the carts stayed open. Quietly, illegally, lovingly. You pass the bakery where earlier you'd eaten a jam-stained crust. It's dark now. The ashes inside the oven still glow faintly. Someone's left a tray of stale buns on the step. You resist. Barely. Ahead, a man sleeps under a cart, a half-eaten leek pie clutched to his chest like a beloved pet. You nod again. You understand him. The city is still except for a final pot clanging shut, a broom brushing crumbs into shadows, and the crunch of your own footsteps as you head toward the gate. The air is colder now. Your breath puffs like steam, but inside you're warm, overfull, a little disgusted, completely satisfied. And yes, the food was strange. It was sometimes frightening, often confusing, but it was real and it was alive. A snapshot of a world that craved flavor, ease, surprise, comfort, and calories. Much like ours. You reach the edge of the town, glance back once more at the crooked rooftops and slanted stalls, now silent under a sky full of stars. The night wind carries the last notes of roasting fat and spiced bread. And then, like a closing door, the scents fade, the world quiets, you smile, and you finally let yourself rest. Now, you're back in bed. The market's long gone, and so are the sticky fingers, the spice clouds, the echo of frying oil bubbling in the dark. All that's left is the memory-warm pastries, whispering vendors, sweet beets, sharp pickles, soft cheese, and that one rat on a stick you maybe didn't hate. You lie still, eyes closed. The journey is behind you now, one bite at a time. Each step you took, muddy, smoky, greasy, carried you through a world where snacks weren't just food. They were connection, comfort, survival, play, prayer, a strange little poetry in grease and bread. You feel your breath slow. The meat pies, the sugar roots, the burnt almonds, they drift now like soft echoes, curling gently at the edges of your imagination. You might even taste honey still clinging to the back of your tongue. Or maybe it's just the sleep catching up. That gentle hum you hear, it could be a fan. Or it could be the distant murmur of a cookshop's fire dying out, a jester's last laugh fading under the moon, a child licking sugar from her fingers beside a cart of forgotten fritters. And you've walked the stalls. You've tasted the odd and the ordinary. You've made it to the end. Let your body go soft now. Let your thoughts slow. Let your breath be easy, gentle, steady. You've eaten enough for a small kingdom. You've wandered far. You've earned the stillness. Sleep now and dream. Perhaps of meat pies with too many legs. Good night.